I was not supposed to be at that restaurant. It was Christmas Eve. My daughter pointed at the lights through the window and said one word, "Pretty." So I walked inside. And there he was, the billionaire who abandoned me when I was pregnant, sitting 10 feet away, raising a champagne glass to his new fiancée. He did not see me at first, but my daughter turned her head, and the moment his eyes met hers, he knew. Because she has his eyes, the exact same eyes. His glass stopped mid-air. His fiancée pulled off her ring right there at the table. 3 tables of strangers started filming, and the life he spent 2 years carefully rebuilding collapsed in under 60 seconds. But here's the part nobody expected. I smiled at him. The way you smile at a stranger. And that smile destroyed him more than any scream ever could. Value statement. This is a story about what happens when you choose comfort over courage, and what it costs to earn back what you threw away. If you have ever been abandoned by someone who should have stayed, or if you have ever been the one who left and wished you had not, this story will stay with you long after it ends. If this opening already gave you chills, trust me, you are not ready for what comes next. Stay with me until the end, because the final twist will change how you see every relationship in your life. And while you are here, subscribe to this channel so you never miss a story like this. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever smiled at someone who broke your heart? Hit that like button if you believe second chances have to be earned, not given. Now let us begin.
I was not supposed to be there that night. The restaurant was a last-minute decision, one of those small, seemingly meaningless choices that end up rearranging your entire life. My daughter Lily had been fussy all afternoon, teething and restless, refusing her nap, throwing her sippy cup across the kitchen with the kind of determined fury only a toddler can produce. By 5 o'clock, I was running out of patience and ideas, so I bundled her into her coat and walked. We wandered through the city without direction, the cold biting at our cheeks, Christmas lights strung above the sidewalks casting everything in gold. Lily stopped crying almost immediately. She always did when there were lights. Something about brightness calmed her in ways I never could explain, as if the world made more sense to her when it sparkled. We passed a restaurant on 63rd Street, the Wren. I had heard of it, but never been inside, obviously. The kind of place where a glass of wine costs more than my weekly grocery budget. But the front window was enormous, floor to ceiling, and behind it stood the most spectacular Christmas tree I had ever seen, towering and covered in crystals that scattered light in every direction. Lily pointed at it and said one word, "Pretty." That one word cost a billionaire everything. But I am getting ahead of myself. My name is Claire Whitfield. I am 34 years old. I am a pediatric nurse, or at least I was before everything fell apart. I'm a mother. And 2 years before that Christmas Eve, I loved a man named Rowan Hale, with every single piece of myself, and he left me without looking back. Here is what nobody tells you about being abandoned by someone you love. It does not happen all at once. You replay the moment constantly, but the real damage spreads slowly, like water soaking through a ceiling, invisible at first, and then suddenly everything is collapsing, and you are standing in the wreckage wondering how you missed the signs. Rowan did not leave dramatically. There was no shouting, no slamming doors. He simply made a decision, the way he made every decision, with calm efficiency, and then he was gone. He left money with a lawyer. He never called. He never asked how I was. He never asked about the baby. I want to be clear about something. I am not telling this story because I want sympathy. I am telling it because what happened next taught me things about love and forgiveness and strength that I could not have learned any other way. And maybe, if you're listening to this, some of it will matter to you too. So there I was, standing outside the Wren on Christmas Eve, with a toddler on my hip and salt stains on my boots, and Lily said pretty, and I thought, why not? We will go inside, look at the tree, maybe order a hot chocolate. What is the worst that could happen? I pushed through the heavy glass door and felt the warmth hit me immediately. That specific warmth of expensive places, the kind that smells like pine and vanilla and money. A hostess glanced at my coat, and then at Lily, and I saw her make the calculation. But before she could redirect me, I smiled and said, we were just here for hot chocolate and the tree, and could we sit near the window? She found us a small table. Lily bounced on my hip, delighted, pointing at everything, the candles, the crystal fixtures, the violin player in the corner. Her laughter carried, bright and uncontained, and a few people at nearby tables looked over with that specific softened expression adults get around toddlers, the involuntary smile, the brief reminder of innocence. I did not see him immediately. I was adjusting Lily's coat, wiping her nose, ordering from the waiter, all the small mechanical tasks of motherhood that consume your attention so completely that the rest of the world temporarily ceases to exist. The waiter knew me, actually. His name was Daniel, and he worked weekends at a coffee shop near my apartment where I went every Saturday morning. He brought the hot chocolate without me having to specify the temperature, which tells you something about the kindness of strangers who pay attention. It was Lily who noticed first. She went still on my lap, which was unusual for her. She was always moving, always reaching, always pointing, but suddenly she stopped and stared across the restaurant with that particular intensity toddlers have when something captures their entire attention. Her brow furrowed, her head tilted slightly to one side, her small fingers curling into my collar. I followed her gaze, and there was Rowan. He sat at a center table, impossibly composed, wearing a tailored black suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. Across from him sat a woman I did not recognize, blonde, elegant, with a ring on her finger that caught the light every time she moved her hand. She was talking about something, gesturing with animation, and Rowan was nodding in that practiced way of his, the way he nodded in meetings when his mind was already 3 steps ahead of the conversation. His champagne glass was raised. For a single, breathless moment, the world stopped. Here is something nobody tells you about seeing someone who broke your heart. Your body recognizes them before your brain does. My pulse spiked. My hands tightened around Lily. My breath shortened. All the physiological responses of threat detection, fight or flight, the ancient machinery of survival kicking in before conscious thought could intervene. But here's the thing I had learned in 2 years of doing everything alone. I was not the same woman he had left behind. That woman had been afraid of conflict, afraid of loneliness, afraid of raising a child without help. That woman was gone. What remained was something harder, something forged in sleepless nights and empty bank accounts, and the absolute refusal to let my daughter see me break. So, I did the only thing that felt honest. I looked at Rowan Hale, the billionaire, the man who abandoned his pregnant girlfriend because love was a variable he could not afford to gamble on, and I smiled. Not a cold smile, not a bitter one. A polite, pleasant, entirely forgettable smile. The kind you give a stranger holding a door. Then I turned back to my daughter and helped her wrap her small hands around the warm mug of hot chocolate. My phone buzzed. A text from my sister Grace. Did Lily poop yet? She had that face at 4. You know the face of destruction. I actually laughed, out loud, in the middle of the most expensive restaurant in Manhattan, with my ex-boyfriend having an existential crisis 10 feet away. I typed back, crisis averted. We are at a fancy restaurant. She is behaving better than most adults here. And that was the moment everything began to unravel. Rowan told me later what happened on his side of the restaurant that night, and I will share it because it matters. Because no story is complete when told from only one direction. He said, time stopped. He said the champagne went flat in his mouth. He said his fiancée, Madeleine, was talking about their engagement party at the plaza. 400 guests, featured in some magazine, and he could not hear a single word because his entire nervous system was focused on the woman who had just walked through the door carrying a child. He recognized me immediately, not gradually, not with uncertainty. He said it was like being hit, a physical impact, the kind that rearranges your internal organs. He had not seen me in 2 years. He had not tried to see me. He had built an entire life designed specifically to avoid ever having to think about what he had done, and now here I was, ordering hot chocolate, laughing at my phone, entirely uninterested in his existence. But it was Lily who destroyed him. When she turned and looked at him with those eyes, his eyes, the same gray-green depth, the same slight furrow of concentration, the same head tilt that he made unconsciously every time he was processing something important, he said denial did not just collapse. It evaporated. Instantly. Completely. Leaving nothing behind but the raw, sickening certainty that he had a daughter, that she was alive and real and breathing, and that she had lived her entire life without knowing his face. Madeleine noticed him standing. She noticed the direction of his stare. She noticed the color draining from his skin like someone had pulled a plug. Rowan. She said his name sharply. Who is that? He did not answer. He walked toward me. His chair scraped against the floor with a sound that turned heads. The violin player lost his place for half a beat. Madeleine sat alone at the table, the champagne untouched, the engagement ring suddenly heavy on her hand, watching her future fall apart in real time, without understanding why. Claire? I turned. I was calm. I had no reason not to be. He was a stranger to me now, or as close to a stranger as someone you once loved completely can become. It is a public restaurant, Rowan. You do not need to announce yourself. His eyes moved to Lily. His voice cracked. Is she... I stopped him before he could finish. Not in front of her. Not in front of your fiancé. And not in front of 50 people with camera phones. I saw something flicker across his face. Not anger. Something worse. Recognition. He understood instantly that I was protecting Lily, not him, and that the reflex to protect was mine alone, earned through 2 years of being the only one who showed up. He stood there for a moment longer, suspended between worlds, and then walked back to his table with the specific stiffness of a man whose body is functioning on autopilot because his mind has left the building. I will tell you what happened next because it set everything else in motion. Madeleine looked at Rowan when he sat back down. She looked at Lily, she looked at me, and then she removed the engagement ring slowly, deliberately, and placed it on the white tablecloth between them. The diamond caught the candlelight one final time. She stood. She picked up her clutch. She walked toward the door, but as she passed my table, she stopped. She looked at Lily with an expression I could not read at the time, something complicated and almost pained, and then she whispered something under her breath. I could not hear the words, but I saw her lips move, and I saw the way her eyes glistened, and I knew that whatever she said was not meant for me. Then she left. 3 tables of people had their phones out. By midnight, the video would have 2 million views. By morning, my name would be public. By the end of the week, my life would be unrecognizable. But I did not know any of that yet. All I knew was that my hot chocolate was getting cold, and Lily had discovered that if she blew on it hard enough, tiny brown droplets splattered across the white tablecloth in patterns she found absolutely hilarious. I cleaned up the mess. I tipped Daniel generously because he pretended not to notice anything. And I carried my daughter out into the snow without looking at Rowan Hale again. Here is something I want you to understand, because it matters for everything that comes next. I did not leave that restaurant feeling powerful. I did not feel like a strong, independent woman delivering cosmic justice. I felt tired. I felt the specific kind of tired that comes from holding yourself together in front of someone who broke you, the exhaustion of performance, of pretending that his presence did not reach inside my chest and squeeze. By the time I got home, Lily was asleep on my shoulder, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock the front door. I put her in her crib. I checked the nightlight, angled it the way she liked, just slightly to the left, so it cast a glow across her stuffed rabbit, Captain, who had to be tucked under her arm, or she would wake up crying at 2 a.m. Then I went to the bathroom. I closed the door, I sat on the floor, and I cried. Not for Rowan, not anymore. I had finished crying for him 14 months ago, on a Tuesday night after a 12-hour shift when I came home to an eviction notice and realized that the man who could have helped me with a phone call did not even know my address. I cried for the girl I used to be, the one who believed that if you loved someone enough, they would stay. The one who thought vulnerability was strength rather than a liability. The one who told Rowan she was pregnant with hope in her voice instead of fear. That girl was gone. I had buried her quietly, without ceremony, and built someone new in her place. Someone harder. Someone more careful. Someone who checked the locks twice and kept 3 months of savings in a separate account and never, ever depended on anyone she could not afford to lose. My phone rang. Grace. I saw the video, she said. Her voice was tight with the specific fury she reserved for situations involving Rowan Hale. Are you okay? Do not lie to me. Are you okay? No, I said. But I will be. I always am. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said the thing that only Grace could say, the thing that made me laugh through tears, which is exactly what she intended. I am going to need you to describe the Fiancée's ring to me in detail so I can judge it. I laughed. I described it. Grace declared it tacky, which it was not, but her loyalty required her to find fault, and I loved her for it. That night I slept with Lily's monitor beside my pillow and dreamed about nothing. The morning after Christmas, Rowan called Thomas Price. Thomas was Rowan's attorney and the closest thing he had to a real friend, though friend was a generous word for the arrangement. Thomas was loyal to whoever paid the most. He had been Rowan's fixer for a decade, the man who made problems disappear with NDAs and settlement agreements, who cleaned up messes before they became headlines. Find out everything, Rowan said. The child, where Claire lives, what she does, everything. Thomas was quiet for too long. That silence should have been Rowan's first warning. Rowan, there is something you should know first. The story Thomas told him changed everything, and I need you to understand that I did not know this part until much later. When I finally learned what had happened behind my back, it rewrote every assumption I had made about the worst year of my life. 2 years earlier, when Rowan left me, I was desperate. Not immediately. The desperation came slowly, building through weeks of reality setting in, bills piling up, doctor's appointments I could barely afford, the growing understanding that I was truly, completely alone in this. In a moment of weakness I am not proud of, I reached out to Victor Hale, Rowan's father. I had met him twice, both times at formal events where he had looked through me as if I were furniture, but I thought maybe, Maybe there was some decency buried beneath the expensive suits and the cold eyes. Maybe he would care that his son was going to be a grandfather. I called his office. I was transferred 3 times. I finally reached an assistant who took my information and said someone would call back. Someone did call back, but it was not Victor. It was Thomas Price. He arrived at my apartment the next day with a briefcase and an expression that I now recognize as rehearsed sympathy. He sat at my kitchen table and placed 2 things in front of me. The first was a check for $500,000. The second was a non-disclosure agreement, 12 pages long, that essentially said I would never contact the Hale family again, never publicly identify Rowan as the father, and never seek child support through the courts. I stared at the check. I stared at Thomas. My hands were on my stomach, 7 months pregnant, and the baby kicked, as if she could sense the insult. Victor Hale had not refused to help me. He had done something much worse. He had calculated my value, assigned it a number, and tried to purchase my silence. I picked up the check. I looked at it for a long time. $500,000 would have changed everything. It would have paid for the apartment, the medical bills, the daycare, the first 2 years of Lily's life. It would have eliminated every financial terror that kept me awake at night. I tore it in half. Thomas blinked. He had clearly not anticipated that response. "Tell Victor Hale," I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me, "that my daughter is not a transaction. And tell Rowan that if he ever wants to know his child, he knows where to find me." Thomas collected the torn pieces, placed them in his briefcase, and left without another word. I found out later that he kept the torn check. He put it in his office safe, not out of sentiment, but as insurance. Thomas Price never discarded anything that might prove useful someday. I never heard from Victor again. I assumed he had simply decided I was not worth the trouble. I assumed Rowan knew nothing about any of it. And I was right about the second part, at least. Rowan had no idea his father had tried to erase his daughter before she was even born. Until that morning after Christmas, when Thomas told him everything. Rowan's reaction was not what Thomas expected. There was no controlled anger, no strategic response, no calm calculation of next steps. There was silence, long and terrible, and then the sound of something breaking. A fist through drywall, Thomas later told me, which honestly seemed dramatic until I considered the magnitude of what Rowan had just learned. He called his father. Victor answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the specific boredom of a man who has never been seriously challenged by anyone in his life. "I did what you could not," Victor said, when Rowan confronted him. "I protected this family's name. You erased my daughter. I removed a complication." "You are welcome," Rowan hung up. And then he sat in silence for over an hour, which, for a man who had spent his entire adult life filling every moment with productivity and control, was the equivalent of a complete system failure. Here's what I want you to notice about this moment, because it carries a lesson that took me years to understand. The worst betrayals do not always come from the people who leave. Sometimes they come from the people who stay, the ones operating in the background, making decisions on your behalf, telling themselves they are protecting you when they are really protecting themselves. Victor Hale did not send that check to protect Rowan. He sent it to protect the Hale name, the Hale legacy, the Hale fortune. My daughter was not a grandchild to him. She was a liability, and he managed her the way he managed every liability, with money and paperwork and the quiet assumption that everyone has a price. He was wrong about me, but he was right about something else. Everyone has a breaking point, and mine was coming, faster than I knew, because Rowan showed up at my apartment that same afternoon. He stood in my doorway with red eyes and raw knuckles, and the expression of a man who has just discovered that the foundation of his life is built on sand. He started talking before I could stop him, words spilling out without structure or strategy, apologies and explanations and promises tumbling over each other in a mess of emotion I had never seen from him before. I let him talk for about 90 seconds. Then I said the thing I had been carrying for 2 years, the thing that was true and necessary and devastating. Your father did not make you leave, Rowan. He just made sure you stayed gone. There is a difference. He flinched as if I had struck him. Now please leave. Lily is napping. I closed the door. And I stood on the other side of it, breathing hard, my hand pressed against the wood, listening to him stand there for a full minute before his footsteps finally retreated down the hall. I did not feel victorious. I felt exhausted and angry, and something else I was not ready to name yet, something that felt dangerously close to grief for a hope I thought I had already killed. The first explosion came from the direction I least expected. Madeline Ashford, Rowan's former fiancée, the woman with the expensive ring and the complicated expression who had whispered something to herself as she passed my table on Christmas Eve. I had dismissed her as a footnote. I was wrong. Here is what I did not know about Madeline. She came from old money, the Ashford name, Connecticut estate, boarding school pedigree, the whole architecture of American aristocracy. But old money does not always mean current money. The Ashfords were hemorrhaging cash. Bad investments, outdated business models, a lifestyle maintained on credit, and reputation rather than actual wealth. Madeline's engagement to Rowan was not just a love story. It was a financial merger disguised as romance. And here's the part that matters. Madeline knew about me, not everything, but 6 months before Christmas, she had found a private investigator's report in Victor Hale's study. She was close with Victor, who had essentially hand-picked her for Rowan the way you select a stock for a portfolio, based on potential return and acceptable risk. The report contained photographs of me and Lily, our address, my workplace, a summary of our financial situation that made me sound like a case file rather than a person. Madeline saw all of this and said nothing, because the wedding secured her family's survival, because love, or whatever version of love she and Rowan shared, was secondary to necessity. Because sometimes people make choices that feel like survival, even when they look like complicity. I am telling you this because I want you to understand what happened next. Madeline did not act out of pure villainy. She acted out of humiliation, desperation, and the specific rage of a woman who has been publicly discarded on what was supposed to be the most important night of her life. None of that excuses what she did, but it explains it, and I think explanations matter more than judgment. 3 days after Christmas, a gossip website published the restaurant video with a headline that read, "Tech Billionaire's Secret Love Child, Christmas Dinner Disaster." Within 12 hours, my full name was in the article. My photo was pulled from my hospital's staff page. My address was in the comments, posted by someone who recognized my apartment building from the background of one of my social media posts. A photo of Lily on the balcony I had shared with exactly 43 followers, most of them family. The internet found me the way the internet finds everyone. Quickly, mercilessly, and without any interest in context or nuance. By the next morning, there were reporters outside my apartment building. Not many, maybe 4 or 5, but enough. Enough to make the walk to daycare feel like a gauntlet. Enough to make me hold Lily tighter against my chest and angle my body to block her face. Enough to make a camera flash go off close enough that Lily startled and started crying. Grace arrived within the hour. My sister is 5 years older than me, a divorce attorney with a voice that carries and a personality that has been described by opposing counsel as aggressively effective. She took one look at the reporters and walked directly toward the one with the largest camera. I will not repeat exactly what she said because some of it was not appropriate for any audience, but the highlights included a detailed description of where the camera could be relocated, a creative interpretation of privacy law that may not have been entirely accurate, but was delivered with absolute conviction, and the phrase, "If you photograph that child one more time, I will make it my personal mission to ensure you spend the rest of your career taking pictures of real estate listings." The video of Grace went viral by lunch. She called me afterward, breathing hard, her voice oscillating between righteous fury and mortification. "I am on TMZ. I look insane. My hair is doing that thing. This is the worst day of my life, and I am including my divorce. You threatened to shove his camera somewhere anatomically impossible," I said. And I meant every word. I almost laughed. Almost. But then I looked at Lily, who was playing on the floor with Captain, completely unaware that her photo was currently being shared by strangers on the internet, and the laughter died in my throat. That was the first catastrophe. The second came from Victor Hale. He did not just defend himself. He attacked. Within a week, a PR firm I later learned was on Victor's payroll began reshaping the narrative. Suddenly, the story was not about a billionaire who abandoned his child. It was about a woman who conveniently appeared at the same restaurant, who had clearly timed her entrance for maximum impact, who was using her child as leverage to extract money from a wealthy family. I watched my own story being rewritten in real time. Comment sections filled with speculation about my motives. Opinion pieces debated whether I was a victim or a strategist. My name became a shorthand for a type, the woman who traps a rich man with a baby, and no amount of truth could compete with the simplicity of that narrative. Then Victor's legal team made their move. They filed for a paternity test, not to confirm Rowan's fatherhood, which Rowan had already acknowledged privately, but to challenge it publicly, to plant doubt, to make me look like a liar in the press before any court had weighed in. And then, the three worst things happened in rapid succession. First, my hospital received so many calls and emails about me that the administration put me on administrative leave. They called it a temporary measure for everyone's safety. It was effectively being fired without being fired. My income vanished overnight. Second, Child Protective Services arrived at my apartment for a wellness check. Two social workers, polite and professional, asking to see Lily's room, her food supply, her medical records. They found nothing wrong because there was nothing wrong. I kept a clean home, a stocked kitchen, and meticulous records of every pediatric appointment. They left after 40 minutes with no concerns noted. But after they left, I sat on the kitchen floor and cried in a way I had not cried since Lily was born. Because someone had weaponized the system designed to protect children and aimed it at me. Because the message was clear: we can reach you anywhere, even in the place where you feel safest, and there is nothing you can do about it. Third, Grace's law firm called her in for a meeting. Victor Hale was not a direct client, but he was connected to a holding company that was a major client of their parent firm. Grace was told, in carefully worded language that meant exactly what it sounded like, that her public involvement in my situation was creating complications, and that perhaps she should consider maintaining some professional distance. Grace told them exactly where they could put their professional distance. She used language that I will not repeat, but that I personally found inspiring. She was fired by the end of the day. That night, my sister sat on my couch with a bottle of wine and a box of tissues and said, "Well, at least we are both unemployed now." That is a bonding experience. I did not laugh. I could not. Because for the first time since Lily was born, I looked at the wreckage of my life and thought the words I had promised myself I would never think. I cannot do this. Grace watched my face and knew exactly what was happening. She put down her wine. She took my hands. "Listen to me," she said. Her voice was quiet, serious, without the usual protective humor. "You're going to document everything. Every text, every email, every visit, every phone call. You're going to screenshot it, send it to 3 different email addresses, and print a hard copy. When powerful people come after you, paper trails are your armor. Do you hear me?" I nodded. And then she said something else, something I carry with me to this day. "They want you to break, Claire. That is the strategy. Pressure from every direction until you crack and do something desperate. Your only job right now is to refuse to break. You do not have to win. You just have to survive long enough for the truth to matter." I did not sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, and I documented everything, every date, every name, every interaction. Building the paper trail my sister told me to build. And in the morning, I made a decision. I left the city on a Tuesday. Not dramatically, not in the middle of the night with a single suitcase like people do in movies. I packed methodically over 3 days, labeling boxes, canceling utilities, forwarding my mail to Grace's address. I cleaned the apartment so thoroughly that you could not tell anyone had lived there at all, which felt symbolic in a way I did not want to examine too closely. Grace's college roommate, a woman named Karen who lived in a small town outside Hartford, Connecticut, had a rental cottage on her property. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with appliances from the previous decade, and a yard with a maple tree that was going to be spectacular in autumn. The rent was $800 a month, which was roughly 1/3 of what I had been paying in Manhattan, and Karen said I could move in immediately. I told Grace the night before I left. She sat on my stripped bed surrounded by boxes and said nothing for a long time, which was unusual for Grace, who typically had opinions about everything and shared them at volume. Finally, she said, "Is this running or is this choosing?" I thought about it carefully because it mattered. There is a difference between running away and choosing peace. Running is fear-based. It is reactive. It shrinks your world because you are trying to escape something. Choosing peace is strategic. It expands your world because you are moving towards something. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is remove yourself from a war you did not start. "This is choosing," I said. Grace nodded. "Okay, then I support it. But I am visiting every other weekend, and you cannot stop me." I drove to Connecticut with Lily in the back seat, and Captain the Rabbit buckled in beside her, because she screamed if he was not secured in his own seatbelt. The drive took 2 hours. Lily slept for most of it. I listened to the silence and felt something I had not felt in months. The absence of dread. The cottage was exactly what I needed. Small, quiet, unremarkable. The kind of place where nobody would think to look because there was nothing to find. I enrolled Lily in a daycare run by a woman named Margaret, who had been caring for children in town for 30 years and who asked me exactly 2 questions. Does she have allergies, and what time will you pick her up? No further inquiry, no Google search of my name, no curious glances, just competence and normalcy, 2 things I had been starving for. I found a job at a small medical clinic within a week. The pay was significantly less than what I had earned in Manhattan, but the hours were reasonable, the staff was kind, and nobody called me with threatening voicemails or showed up outside with cameras. The town itself absorbed me the way small towns absorb newcomers, with polite curiosity and respectful distance. People noticed me, certainly. A young woman with a toddler and no visible husband in a cottage on Karen's property was not invisible, but nobody pressed. Nobody demanded my story. They let me arrive at their doorsteps on my own terms. Except for Barb. Barb worked at the grocery store, a small independent market on Main Street that smelled like bread and apples and had creaky wooden floors. She was somewhere between 65 and immortal, with silver hair and glasses on a chain, and the kind of directness that you either loved or feared, depending on your comfort, with unfiltered honesty. The first time I came through her checkout line, she looked at Lily and said, "She has got those fancy eyes, you from the city." "Is it that obvious?" I said. "Honey, you are wearing heels to buy milk." I looked down at my shoes. She was right. I had not even noticed. 2 years in Manhattan, and I had forgotten that heels were not standard footwear for grocery runs. I switched to sneakers the next day. Barb noticed and nodded approvingly and said nothing else, which was its own form of welcome. Over the following weeks, Barb became something I had not expected to find in Connecticut, a presence, not a friend exactly, not yet, but a steady point of contact, someone who remembered Lily's name and asked how daycare was going, and occasionally offered unsolicited life advice like, "Men are like weather. You cannot control them, but you can carry an umbrella." She watched Lily sometimes, on afternoons when my shift ran long and Margaret's daycare closed at 5. I would arrive at the grocery store to find Lily sitting on the counter, eating crackers, while Barb rang up customers one-handed and narrated the process to my daughter, as if she were training her for a future career in retail. "This one is buying too much wine for a Tuesday," Barb would whisper to Lily. "We do not judge, but we notice. Life in Connecticut was quiet. It was small. It was exactly what I needed. I planted a garden because the cottage had good soil. I learned that Lily loved dandelions more than roses, which seemed philosophically correct. I read books again. I slept through the night. I stopped checking my phone every 10 minutes for new articles about my life. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like I could breathe. And for a while, a brief and precious while, I thought maybe that was enough. Maybe I could build a life here that was small and safe and entirely mine. Maybe the past would stay where I had left it, 2 hours south, on the interstate, in a city that had chewed me up and spit me out. I should have known better. The past does not stay where you leave it. It follows. It waits. And it always, always finds you when you have just started to believe you are free. While I was planting a garden in Connecticut, Rowan was burning his life to the ground in Manhattan. I did not witness most of this directly. I learned the details later, through Grace and through Rowan himself, assembled piece by piece like a puzzle that only makes sense when you step far enough back to see the whole picture. The first thing he did was confront Victor, not at the penthouse, not over the phone. He went to the corporate headquarters of Hale Industries, a glass tower in Midtown that bore the family name in letters 6 feet tall. And he confronted his father in his office, in front of witnesses. "You sent CPS to the mother of my child," Rowan said. Victor's response was the response of a man who has never been held accountable for anything. "I sent a concerned inquiry about a child's welfare." Any responsible family member would do the same. Rowan slammed both hands on the desk, hard enough to rattle the water glasses. "If you go near them again, I will dismantle everything with your name on it. Every board seat, every foundation, every building. I will make the Hale name mean nothing." Victor leaned back in his chair with the specific calm of someone who believes himself untouchable. "You do not have the spine for that, son. Try me." Rowan walked out. He called his personal attorney, not Thomas Price, whom he no longer trusted, and gave a single instruction: freeze my father's access to every joint account, every trust, every shared asset, everything. Then he resigned from the board of Hale Industries. He sold his shares. He severed every financial connection to his father that could be legally severed. The business press called it corporate suicide. Analysts speculated about mental health breakdowns. Victor's PR team spun it as a mutual parting of ways, which was a lie so transparent that even the financial journalists did not bother pretending to believe it. But Rowan was not finished. He ended the engagement with Madeline, though by that point it was already over. He did it quietly, in person, without the dramatic flair that had characterized most of his public life. He sat across from her in the apartment they had shared and told her the truth, with a bluntness that he later described as the first honest thing he had done in years. "I never fully chose you," he said. "I chose the idea of you, the safety of you. And that is not fair to either of us." Madeline listened with the composure of a woman who had already known this, but needed to hear it said out loud. She left with Grace, her departing footsteps echoing in the marble hallway, and Rowan said later that the sound haunted him longer than he expected, not because he loved her, but because her leaving confirmed what he had always feared, that he was incapable of real connection. That distance was his default, not a choice but an identity. He sold the penthouse next, the skyline he had obsessed over, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the furniture that whispered of innovation and success, all of it gone. He moved into a rental in Brooklyn that was smaller than some hotel rooms he had stayed in, with a kitchen that did not have an island and a bathroom where you could touch both walls if you stretched your arms. Thomas Price, sensing the shift in power, attempted his usual strategy of playing both sides. He offered his services to Victor while still technically representing Rowan. When this was discovered, because these things are always discovered, both Hales fired him on the same day. Thomas, who had built his career on being indispensable to powerful people, found himself suddenly dispensable, which was a poetic justice that I confess I enjoyed hearing about. But here's the part that surprised me, the part that I did not expect, and that changed the trajectory of everything. Rowan hired a private investigator, not to find me. He knew that searching for me would be a violation of every boundary I had established. And whatever else was true about Rowan Hale, he was not stupid. He hired the investigator to compile evidence against Victor. Medical records requests Victor had made about me during my pregnancy, the non-disclosure agreement, the financial pressure points Victor had activated, the CPS visit, which the investigator traced back to a call made from a phone registered to a subsidiary of a company Victor controlled. Every thread, every connection, every fingerprint Victor had left on my destruction. Rowan assembled all of it into a file, and then he did something that I still think about when I'm trying to understand who he became versus who he was. He sent it to Grace, but not to me, to Grace, because he knew I would not open anything that came from him. But Grace was a lawyer. Grace would know what to do with evidence. Grace would know how to protect me with it. He included a handwritten note. I have read it so many times that I have memorized it. It said this: "I am not asking for forgiveness. I am giving you ammunition. Use it however she needs." Grace drove to Connecticut with the file on a Saturday afternoon. She also brought a bottle of wine because Grace believed that no serious conversation should be conducted without alcohol. A philosophy I disagreed with in principle, but appreciated in practice. She laid everything out on my kitchen table: Victor's full involvement, the NDA attempt, the CPS manipulation, Madeline's financial desperation, Thomas Price's double dealing, and Rowan's methodical self-destruction, the sold penthouse, the severed ties, the fortune he was systematically dismantling. I read it all in silence. It took over an hour. Lily was napping. The house was quiet, except for the sound of pages turning and Grace's careful breathing. When I finished, I said one thing. He sent this to you, not to me. He said you would not open it, Grace replied. He was right. There was a long silence. Grace poured wine. I stared at the file and tried to process what I was feeling, which was not simple. Was not one emotion, but many, layered and contradictory and resistant to language. What do you want to do? Grace asked. I want Lily to have a normal life. I want to never see Victor Hale again. And I stopped. What? I want to stop being angry. I am so tired of being angry, Grace. Grace held me. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Lily woke up and wandered into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes, and Grace picked her up and held both of us, and the three of us stood there, in my small Connecticut kitchen, while the afternoon light came through the window and the wine went untouched on the table. I need to tell you about Madeline now, because what she did next was the thing that nearly ended everything. After the engagement imploded, Madeline returned to her family's Connecticut estate and did what any wounded, desperate, financially endangered woman in her position would do. She assessed her assets. What she had was information. Specifically, she had recordings. During their relationship, Rowan had a habit of making voice memos, business ideas, meeting notes, strategy outlines, all dictated into his phone. During late nights and early mornings, when his mind moved faster than his ability to type, Madeline had heard dozens of them, background noise during their shared mornings, unremarkable and forgettable, except for the ones from 2 years ago. She had found them months earlier while looking for a specific restaurant reservation Rowan had dictated. She had scrolled too far back in his voice memo app and stumbled onto recordings from the week I told him about the pregnancy. In those memos, Rowan did not sound hesitant. He did not sound conflicted. He sounded cold, calculated, clinical. He referred to my pregnancy as a situation that needs to be managed. He discussed containment strategies with Thomas Price. He weighed the financial implications of acknowledgement versus denial. He used phrases like minimize exposure and control disengagement that made my pregnancy sound like a hostile corporate takeover rather than the creation of a human life. Madeline had kept these recordings as insurance. She had never intended to use them. But then Christmas Eve happened, and humiliation happened, and the destruction of her financial lifeline happened, and Madeline made the choice that desperate people make when they feel they have nothing left to lose. She released the recordings to the same gossip outlets that had published the restaurant video. The audio went everywhere, every website, every social media platform, every comment section. Rowan's voice, stripped of context, playing on a loop, reducing my pregnancy to a liability and my daughter to a problem to be solved. The public reaction was immediate and brutal. Whatever sympathy the controlled interview had generated evaporated overnight. The narrative snapped back into focus with renewed venom, and this time it was aimed squarely at Rowan. But the collateral damage hit me, because I heard them too. Grace called me before I could find them on my own. Do not listen to them, she said, her voice carrying the specific urgency of someone who has already listened and wishes she had not. Claire, promise me you will not listen. I listened. I sat in my car in the clinic parking lot during my lunch break, and I listened to the man I had loved describe our child as a complication requiring management, and something inside me that I thought was already dead turned out to have one last breath left, just enough to feel the full weight of a betrayal I had thought I already understood. I had known he left. I had known he chose ambition over us. I had accepted that, processed it, built a life on the other side of it. But I had always told myself a story about his departure, a story in which he was afraid, conflicted, ultimately weak rather than malicious. I had given him the benefit of doubt as a form of self-preservation, because believing he was simply scared was easier than believing he was indifferent. The recordings took that story away from me. They did not just confirm what I already knew. They added a dimension of coldness that I had not imagined, a clinical detachment that made our entire relationship feel like a transaction I had been too naive to recognize. For the first time, I did not just feel abandoned. I felt stupid for ever having loved him at all. That night, I called Grace. My voice was calm, which frightened her more than crying would have. I am done, I said. I am not fighting this. I am not engaging. They can have the narrative. I am taking Lily somewhere even quieter, and I am disappearing completely. I just want my daughter safe. Claire, if you run now, they win. Maybe I do not care about winning anymore. Maybe I just care about surviving. Grace was silent. I could hear her breathing. I could hear her thinking. Then she said, "You are the strongest person I know, and I need you to be strong for 3 more days. Can you give me 3 days?" Why 3 days? Because I am going to fix this. Trust me. I trusted her. I had no reason not to. Grace had never let me down, not once, not in 34 years of being my sister and my shield and the person who showed up at my delivery room 20 minutes late with the good ice chips. I gave her 3 days. Grace did not fix everything. That was an exaggeration driven by sisterly confidence and 2 glasses of wine. But she came closer than anyone else could have. She started with the evidence file Rowan had sent. She spent 2 days organizing it into a legal brief that she later described as the most satisfying document she had ever written, which, coming from a divorce attorney, was significant. Then she made phone calls, not to journalists, not to lawyers, to people, specific people in specific positions who had the ability to make things happen quietly and permanently. She called the licensing board about the CPS visit, providing evidence that it had been orchestrated as harassment rather than a legitimate concern. She filed formal complaints against the PR firm Victor had hired, documenting the coordinated campaign to manipulate public narrative. She contacted Madeleine's legal representation and pointed out, with the polite savagery that only a good lawyer can achieve, that releasing private recordings without consent constituted wiretapping under New York state law and carried significant civil liability. Madeleine's lawyers encouraged her to disappear to Europe, which she did, quietly, without further comment. The recordings remained online because the internet does not forget, but the source dried up, and without new fuel, the fire began to shrink. But the most important thing Grace did was not legal. It was personal. She went to see Rowan. She drove to his Brooklyn rental, climbed 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken, and knocked on his door at 8 in the morning on a Wednesday. When he opened it, she said, without preamble or pleasantry, "Here's what is going to happen." Rowan, to his credit, listened. Grace laid out terms that were not negotiable. Rowan would make no further public statements about Claire or Lily. He would take legal action against Victor to establish a restraining order. He would set up a trust fund for Lily that Claire could access or ignore as she chose, and he would wait. Not contact Claire, not search for Claire. Wait until Claire decided, on her own terms and her own timeline, whether she wanted him in their daughter's life. Rowan agreed to everything within the hour. Grace studied him for a long moment before she left. She told me later that she was looking for performance, for the rehearsed sincerity she had seen from 1,000 clients who said what they needed to say to get what they wanted. She did not find it. What she found instead was exhaustion and something she reluctantly identified as genuine shame. She told him one last thing before she walked out. If you hurt her again, I will not come to your apartment and have a civilized conversation. I will come to whatever is left of your life, and I will end it, professionally speaking. Rowan apparently nodded and said, I understand. Grace said, good, and left. The weeks that followed were quiet, in the way that aftermath is quiet. The noise receded. The articles stopped appearing. Victor, facing legal pressure from multiple directions and the loss of his son's financial support, retreated into the kind of wealthy silence that powerful men mistake for dignity. And I planted tomatoes. That sounds absurd, I know. The world had been on fire for months, and my response was to kneel in the dirt behind my Connecticut cottage and put tomato seedlings in the ground. But there is something about gardening that resets your nervous system. The patience required, the acceptance that growth cannot be forced, the understanding that you plant something and then you wait, and whether it thrives depends on sunlight and rain and variables beyond your control. It felt relevant. Lily helped. She dug in the dirt with a plastic shovel and ate a worm, which I pretended not to see because some battles are not worth fighting. Barb came by one afternoon with a bag of fertilizer and unsolicited advice about tomato spacing. She looked at my garden, looked at me, and said, "You are going to be fine." I did not ask what she meant. I just took the fertilizer and said thank you. Spring turned into summer. Lily grew. She started saying more words. She called Grace Gigi because she could not pronounce Grace, and the nickname stuck with such permanence that Grace eventually changed her contact name in my phone to reflect it. I received a letter, not from Rowan, from his attorney, a formal notice that a trust fund had been established in Lily's name. No conditions, no strings, no requirement for contact or communication. The money was simply there, available if I ever needed it. I put the letter in a drawer and did not think about it for 3 weeks. Then one night, after Lily was asleep and the house was quiet and I was sitting on the porch watching fireflies, I took the letter out and read it again. And I cried, not from grief this time, but from the complicated, contradictory emotion of recognizing that someone who had hurt you was trying, imperfectly and belatedly, to be decent. It was not enough. It was not close to enough. But it was something. And something, after nothing, felt enormous. 6 months passed before I was ready. I want to be honest about what ready means in this context, because I think people misunderstand readiness as a destination, a place you arrive at with confidence and clarity. It is not. Readiness, at least for me, was more like a door I walked past every day for months, and one morning I simply stopped walking past it and turned the handle instead. I was not confident. I was not certain. I was still angry, though the anger had changed shape over time, from a sharp, burning thing to something duller and heavier, more like sadness wearing anger's clothes. What changed was Lily. She had started asking questions. Not about Rowan specifically, because she did not know enough to ask about him, but about the concept of fathers in general. She noticed them at the playground, at daycare, in the books we read together. She would point at a picture of a family and say, "Daddy," with the neutral curiosity of a child cataloging the world, and each time she said it, something in my chest tightened. She deserved answers. Not the sanitized, simplified answers I had been preparing in my head for years, but real ones, honest ones, given at the right time and in the right way. And I realized that providing those answers required Rowan to exist as more than an absence. I wrote him a letter, handwritten, because I wanted the words to carry weight, to feel permanent, to require the effort of ink on paper rather than the ease of a text message. The letter contained 3 conditions. First, he would meet Lily on my terms, at my location, with Grace present. Second, Victor Hale would never come within 100 miles of my daughter, ever. Third, no lawyers, no PR, no media. This stayed private, or it did not happen at all. Grace delivered the letter. Rowan agreed to everything within an hour. He drove to Connecticut on a Saturday morning in early autumn. The maple tree in the yard had turned exactly the shade of red I had imagined when I first moved in, and the garden had produced tomatoes that Barb declared acceptable, which was high praise from a woman whose standards were unreasonable. Rowan arrived in a pickup truck, not a limousine, not a town car, a pickup truck, used, slightly dented, visibly practical. He wore a plain jacket, no suit, no designer watch, nothing that signaled wealth or status. He looked different, thinner, quieter. There was something in his posture that I had never seen before, a quality of uncertainty, of waiting, of being willing to occupy the position of someone who has no authority and knows it. Grace stood near the porch with her arms crossed, radiating a protective energy that could have been detected from space. She had dressed for the occasion in what she called her intimidation cardigan, which was just a regular cardigan, but worn with the energy of body armor. Lily was on the swings. She saw Rowan before I introduced them. She stopped swinging, her feet dragging in the dirt, and tilted her head with that gesture, the one that was identical to his, the unconscious head tilt of processing. I spoke carefully. Lily, this is Rowan. He is a friend of mine. He wanted to meet you. I chose the word friend deliberately. It was accurate enough for a 2-year-old and honest enough for an adult. Anything more would have been premature. Anything less would have been a lie. Lily studied Rowan for a long moment with the intensity that only children possess, the unfiltered assessment of someone who has not yet learned to mask their judgments with politeness. She looked at his face. She looked at his hands. She looked at his eyes, which were the same color as hers. Then she climbed off the swing, walked over with the deliberate steps of someone on a mission, and handed him a leaf she had found on the ground. Present, she said, very seriously. Rowan took it. I watched his face as he held that leaf, and I saw something crack open, not dramatically, not with noise, but quietly, the way ice fractures along invisible lines before the whole surface gives way. His eyes filled. His hand trembled. He held the leaf as if it were made of gold. Grace, watching from the porch, muttered under her breath, "Do not cry. Do not you dare cry. If he cries, I am going to cry, and I just did my mascara," she cried. Rowan knelt to Lily's height. He did not try to hug her. He did not try to pick her up. He simply knelt and said, "Thank you. This is the best present I have ever received." Lily considered this. Then she nodded, apparently satisfied, and went back to the swings. I watched Rowan watch her. I watched the emotions cycle across his face, wonder and grief, and something tentative that might have been hope, if hope had the good sense to feel terrified. And I felt, for the first time in years, the faintest loosening of the knot in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, not trust, but the smallest, most cautious acknowledgement that maybe, possibly, this man standing in my yard holding a dead leaf was not the same man who had recorded voice memos about managing my pregnancy like a liability. Maybe, possibly, it was enough to start. I set rules, not negotiable, not flexible, not subject to charm or money or grand gestures. Weekly visits, 1 hour each, at my home, with me present. No gifts that cost more than $20, because I would not let my daughter learn that love was something purchased. Rowan agreed to everything without argument. He came back the following Saturday, and the Saturday after that, and the one after that. He read Lily bedtime stories over video calls when he could not be there in person. He learned that she was afraid of thunder and recorded himself making up a story about the sky drums, a tale about clouds who played music too loudly because they were excited about rain, and she laughed instead of crying the next time a storm rolled through. He showed up in the rain. He showed up when he was sick. He showed up on a random Tuesday when a pipe burst in the cottage and I needed someone to help while I kept Lily dry, and he spent 3 hours on his knees in standing water with a wrench he did not know how to use, and I had to call an actual plumber anyway, but he stayed. He stayed. Barb saw Rowan at the grocery store one day, buying apple juice and goldfish crackers with the focused concentration of a man performing surgery. She looked at him, looked at me, and said, "That the weather you were running from. He does not look like a storm anymore, more like a drizzle." I did not laugh, but almost. Victor Hale came to Connecticut on an October afternoon when the trees were burning with color and the air smelled like wood smoke and apples. He did not call ahead. He did not announce himself. He simply arrived the way men like Victor arrive everywhere, with the assumption that their presence is both inevitable and non-negotiable. I opened the front door and saw him standing on my porch, tailored coat, silver hair, the face of a man who has spent 7 decades believing that money and power and the careful application of pressure could bend any situation to his will. My blood went cold, not from fear, from rage. Pure, white-hot, incandescent rage. This man had tried to buy my silence. He had sent CPS to my home. He had orchestrated a media campaign to paint me as a gold digger. He had tried to erase my daughter before she was born, and now he was standing on my porch in Connecticut with the audacity to look grandfatherly. Before he could speak, a truck pulled into the driveway. Rowan's truck, Saturday. His regular visit. Rowan stepped out, saw his father on my porch. The air between them went electric. Something shifted in Rowan's posture, a straightening, a squaring, the physical manifestation of a line being drawn. He walked past his father and stood between Victor and my front door, his body a barrier, his face carrying an expression I had never seen on him before, not anger, not aggression, but absolute, immovable resolve. "I came to meet my granddaughter," Victor said. His voice was smooth, reasonable, carrying the practiced warmth of a man who has spent a lifetime making terrible things sound civilized. "No," Rowan said. "You came to control something. That is all you have ever done, and it is over." Victor's eyes narrowed. "You are throwing away your legacy." "No, Dad. I am building one." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. Victor looked at me, then at Rowan, then at the cottage, the yard, the swing set, the modest life that his son had chosen over everything Victor had built. He was searching for leverage, for a pressure point, for the angle that would allow him to reassert dominance. He found nothing. For the first time in this entire story, Victor Hale had no power, and watching him realize it, watching the understanding settle across his face like a shadow, was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. He left without another word, got in his car, drove away. I never saw him again. Rowan stood on the porch for a moment, his back still to me, his shoulders carrying tension that was slowly, visibly releasing. When he turned, his face was tired and uncertain and entirely human. I did not thank him. I did not need to, but I opened the door wider and said something that surprised us both. "Lily made cookies. They are terrible. Come in." The corners of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Something more honest than a smile. He came in. The months that followed were not a fairy tale. I want to be very clear about that, because I think people want love stories to be clean and linear, with a definite moment where everything clicks into place and the credits roll. Real life does not work that way. Real forgiveness is not a moment. It is not a switch you flip. It is waking up every day and choosing to let go of one small piece of anger. Some days you manage it. Some days you pick the anger right back up again. Both are normal. Both are part of healing. There were setbacks. There were arguments. There was a night when Lily had a fever and Rowan panicked so completely that I had to remind him that I had been managing fevers alone for 2 years and that 101.2 was not a medical emergency. He apologized. He overcorrected. He brought a thermometer the next visit that cost $80 and had Bluetooth connectivity, which was absurd, and I told him it was absurd, and he agreed, but kept it anyway. There was a night, weeks later, when the house was quiet and Lily was asleep and Rowan and I sat on the porch in the dark, and he said, without preamble or preface, I listened to the recordings. I went still. The ones I made, he continued, after you told me about the pregnancy. I went back and listened to every single one, and I need you to know that I cannot explain them. I cannot justify them. I cannot tell you that I did not mean what I said, because I did mean it at the time, in that moment. I meant every clinical, detached, cowardly word, and the fact that I meant it is the thing I have to live with. He paused. The crickets were loud. I am not that person anymore, he said, but I was. I was exactly that person. And you deserved so much better. I did not respond immediately. I let the words sit between us. I let myself feel them fully, the pain and the honesty and the strange, unexpected relief of hearing someone name their worst self without excuses. Then I said, yes, I did deserve better. Another silence. And then, do you know what Lily said about you yesterday? He looked at me. What? She said you make funny faces when you read the dinosaur book. She wants you to read it again Saturday. It was not forgiveness. It was not absolution. It was an invitation to keep going. And sometimes that is all you can offer someone. Not the whole thing at once, but the next step, and the next, and the next, until the distance between where you are and where you want to be has been crossed without your noticing. Christmas Eve came again, 1 year after the restaurant. We were not at the Wren. We were in the cottage. The plates were mismatched. The tree was decorated by Lily, which meant all the ornaments were clustered at the bottom because she could only reach so far. Grace was there, slightly too much eggnog, teaching Lily to say objection because she thought it was hilarious, which it was. Rowan was in the kitchen. He was not a great cook. He was, in fact, a terrible cook. But he had spent 3 months watching YouTube tutorials and had developed what he called a relationship with the oven, which mostly meant he burned things at a consistent rate rather than a random one. The smoke alarm went off. Lily thought it was the funniest thing she had ever heard. She laughed so hard she fell over. Grace said, "This is the finest Christmas dinner I have ever witnessed." And she was being sarcastic, but also she was smiling in the way she smiles when she is happy and does not want to admit it. Rowan emerged from the kitchen with a tray of rolls that were, conservatively, 30% charcoal. He caught my eye across the room. I burned the rolls. I know. I can smell them from here. A pause. Then quietly, Rowan said, "Thank you for letting me be here. I did not say you are welcome. I said, do not make me regret it." But I was almost smiling. Lily ran over, grabbed both our hands, and pulled us toward the lopsided tree with the urgency of a child who has been waiting for this moment her entire short life. Present time. Present time. We opened presents on the floor. Lily received a stuffed dinosaur from Rowan that she named Captain 2, because every important stuffed animal in her world was apparently named Captain. Grace received a gift card to a spa and pretended to be offended that Rowan thought she needed relaxation, then immediately booked an appointment on her phone. I received a small box. Inside was a silver bracelet, simple, unadorned, with a single charm. A leaf. I looked at Rowan. He looked at me. Neither of us spoke because some things do not survive translation into words. They exist only in the space between two people who have heard each other and chosen, despite everything, to try again. Grace cried. She blamed the eggnog. Later that night, after Lily was asleep with Captain and Captain 2 tucked under each arm, and Grace was snoring on the couch under a blanket she had stolen from my bed, Rowan and I stood in the kitchen, washing dishes in silence. He washed, I dried. It was the most ordinary thing in the world, and it was everything. I want to tell you what I have learned because I think it matters. I think it is the reason I told this story at all. Love is not a feeling. It is a choice you make every single day, especially on the days when you do not feel it. It is showing up on a random Tuesday in the rain to fix a fence you do not know how to fix. It is learning that your daughter needs her nightlight angled just right, or she cannot sleep. It is sitting in the silence of someone's anger and not running from it. It is choosing to stay when every instinct says leave. I do not know what Rowan and I are. I am not sure I need to name it yet. We are not engaged. We are not officially together. We are two people who share a daughter and a complicated history and a growing collection of burned meals and inside jokes and quiet evenings on a porch in Connecticut. What I know is this: he has not missed a single Saturday. Not one. Rain, snow, illness, nothing. He shows up, he stays, he does the work. And slowly, so slowly that I almost did not notice, the distance between us has been closing. I am not afraid of tomorrow anymore, and for now, that is enough. Some love stories do not begin with a spark. They begin with a second chance nobody deserved, and one person brave enough to give it anyway. I was not supposed to be at that restaurant on Christmas Eve, but I am so glad I was. Closing disclaimer: all content on this channel is carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with real-life lessons. Every word is crafted with intention. We do not use automated generation. We build these stories by hand because we believe great storytelling deserves real effort, and so do you. Thank you for listening, and we will see you in the next one.